Hello, my name is Siobhan Pearce and I work in the Education Department at the National Museum of Ireland Archaeology, and I'd like to welcome you to today's online lecture about one of the most amazing pieces of craftsmanship from medieval times and one of Ireland's greatest national treasures, the Cross of Cong. And the talk will be given by Dr. Griffin Murray, who has just joined me here on screen.
Hello.
So today's lecture about the Cross of Cong and the art, archaeology and history of this medieval Irish treasure marks the 900th anniversary of the creation of the Cross of Cong. And it was commissioned in 1123 by the High King of Ireland, Turlough O'Connor, to enshrine a relic of the true cross. And Dr. Griffin Murray, who's giving today's lecture, is a lecturer in Archaeology and Museum Studies at University College Cork. And it's very appropriate Griffin is giving today's talk. He's a specialist in Irish medieval church metalwork. His doctoral thesis, completed at University College Cork in 2007, was about the Cross of Cong and church metalwork from Romanesque Ireland. And he is the author of two books, The Cross of Cong, a masterpiece of medieval Irish art, and with K. O'Dwyer, St Manchan's Shrine, Art and Devotion in 12th-Century Ireland. So just to say, today's lecture will be around 45 minutes in duration, and Dr. Murray has kindly agreed to take a small number of questions after his talk. So how this works is, this is a closed YouTube live event with his pre-recorded lecture, and there'll be a live Q&A at the end. So at the end, you'll be able to put questions into the chat for us to answer. Just to say, there is a time limit on this. We are aware it's a lunchtime talk for many people as well, so we will get to as many questions as we can, but there may be a limit on that. So at the moment, I'd ask you to sit back and listen to today's lecture, and we look forward to talking to you in 45 minutes.
The Cross of Cong is one of Ireland's national treasures. It's on permanent display in the Treasury Gallery in the National Museum of Ireland Archaeology on Kildare Street in Dublin, along with the Ardagh Chalice, the Tower Brooch and the Derry na Fleadh Hoard. This lecture is being held to mark the 900th anniversary of its creation. The Cross of Cong is not only remarkable because of its art and craftsmanship, or because of its excellent preservation, but also because of its precise dating and known historical context. Indeed, it is the most precisely dated work of medieval art from Ireland. The cross was commissioned in 1123 by Turlough O'Connor, the most powerful king in early 12th century Ireland, and its original enshrinement was for the relic of the true cross, what was believed to be a relic of the true cross, i.e. a fragment of Christ's cross. It was made at Roscommon during a time when the Irish Church was going through a major period of reform and reorganisation, and it is against that background that it is best understood. Indeed, I'll argue that the cross played a significant role in church politics and in the establishment and recognition of an archdiocesan capital for Connacht. The earliest reference to the cross being in Cong is by the Welsh antiquary Edward Clude. This transcription and partial translation, which you can see at the top of the screen, is a recording of the first two lines of the inscription on the Cross of Cong, made, probably at Cong itself, by the historian Roderick O'Flaherty in the year 1680. The cross was obviously known in Connacht at the time and was associated with the abbots of the Augustinian Abbey at Cong. It's not known when the cross first arrived at Cong, but its presence there should not be unexpected, since the monastery was very closely associated with the O'Duffy family from the 12th century onwards. Indeed, Murdoch O'Duffy, the person mentioned in the section of the inscription recorded by O'Flaherty here, he himself died at Cong in 1150, and numerous members of the same family occupied the abbacy there throughout the later medieval period. It appears that the Cross of Cong was later hidden, probably during the period of the penal laws, and was rediscovered in the late 18th century in an old chest in a house in the village. George Petrie, the archaeologist, examined the cross in 1822 at Father Prendergast's home at Abbottstown, a secluded and picturesque spot around 2 miles from Cong itself. William Wilde, whose family had a home at Cong, recalled, "The author remembers it during his boyish days in the possession of Abbot Prendergast," that's Father Patrick Prendergast, "who kept it, he tells us, with other relics in a 3-cornered cupboard in his little sitting room at Abbottstown. It used, however, be placed upon the altar of Cong Chapel at the festivals of Christmas and Easter. After Prendergast's death, it was removed to Cong, at which time the central crystal had been removed, and was usually carried by a lady in her pocket. If still in existence, it's not known where the relic for which this cross was made is at present." In 1838, efforts were made by the Royal Irish Academy to acquire the Cross of Cong from the then parish priest, Father Michael Waldron. Fortunately, a letter from the priest to George Smith, who is acting on behalf of the Academy, is preserved, which gives a unique insight into the circumstances of the purchase and also its effect on the local community. Okay. Cong, 3rd of September, 1838. "My dear sir, the people without a single exception would sooner sell all they have in this world than consent to part with the old cross. They actually got furious at the very thoughts of it. With all their poverty, they offered to make up the sum offered for it without delay, though the only commodity the greater part of them have at present for market is the potato, and mind, not enough of that root for the year's supply. They also, before they separated, got into a subscription to create a fund to have it sent to Dublin, to have it repaired and cleaned, and to have any of the pebbles that have been lost replaced by new ones. So enthusiastic are their feelings towards any relic of the abbey as considering it an existing monument of their splendour in olden times that they will insist on getting back St. Patrick's tooth, cost what it may. P.S. Our bishop passes by here next week. I will consult him about the cross. I would prefer the price of it for some decorations for the chapel to itself. We may still prevail on them." Prevail they did, as the cross was bought for 100 guineas the following year. Its sale was hastened by the night of the big wind in January 1839 that blew the roof off the parish church, resulting in an immediate need for finance. The cross was paid for personally by Professor James McCullough, a member of the Royal Irish Academy and a physicist at Trinity College Dublin, who presented it to the Academy Museum. The official presentation took place on the 24th of June, 1839, at a meeting attended by the Lord Lieutenant. The Cross of Cong was the Royal Irish Academy's first major archaeological acquisition, and it was to form the centrepiece of a new and expanding National Museum of Archaeology. In 1890, the Cross of Cong was transferred with the rest of the Royal Irish Academy's archaeological collection to the National Museum of Ireland, where it has remained one of the most important objects in the museum's collection. The Cross of Cong is a processional reliquary cross. It consists of a wooden core encased by cast copper alloy plates, which are decorated with precious metals and glasswork. It is curved at the points where the arms and the shaft meet in a similar manner to Irish high crosses, except in this case, the ring is absent. The shaft and arms are slightly concave and expand gradually towards their terminals, while the edges of the cross are punctuated by projecting circular settings. It features a circular boss at the crossing, surmounted by a rock crystal, under which the relic of the true cross was kept. And it is fitted with a knop and socket at its base for the insertion of a carrying staff. It's 76 centimeters in height, 48 centimeters broad, and it's on average about 3.5 centimeters thick. Perhaps one of the surprising things about the Cross of Cong is that despite its golden appearance, there is relatively little gold and silver used in its decoration. The reasons for this are probably to do with limitations in the supply of precious metals in Ireland during the early 12th century. However, it's not the materials used in the making of the Cross of Cong that are impressive. Rather, it is what the craftsman was able to do with the limited materials available to him that is most remarkable. The quality of the castings, inlays and finishes are outstanding, and when one examines them in detail, it leaves one in no doubt that the cross is truly a masterpiece of metal craftsmanship. Its distinctive form seems to have been largely inspired by cross forms commonly found in early medieval Ireland. Examples include the 8th or 9th century cross from Turlough in County Roscommon, although some closer parallels may be found in Anglo-Saxon England. However, a single plate from another cross, very like those on the back of the Cross of Cong, suggests that its form was not unique in Ireland in the early 12th century. In advance of the publication of my book, there was an opportunity to carry out some limited scientific analysis of the cross, and this was performed by Dr. Paul Malarkey of the Conservation Department at the National Museum of Ireland. The cross was X-rayed and some non-invasive metal analysis was carried out. The central plate on the front of the cross was temporarily removed, and the species of wood that forms its core was formally identified by Dr. Ellen O'Carroll. The core of the cross is formed out of two pieces of oak, which form the shaft and arms respectively. When the central plate of the cross was removed, a double-armed cross, which had been roughly cut into the wood, was revealed, as you can see here on the screen. This cross, known as an archiepiscopal or Byzantine cross, is often associated with relics of the true cross from Constantinople. While the reasons for making this cross are unknown, one might speculate that it may have formed part of a ritual blessing of the materials before the cross was constructed. There's also a faint ring on the front of the wooden core. I'm not sure if you can see that. It's like the ring from a coffee cup, which appears to indicate the original position of a circular receptacle now lost. This would have originally held the relic in place underneath the central rock crystal. The arrangement of displaying a relic underneath a crystal is an idea that comes from the continent, where it was used to great effect on 11th and 12th century German reliquary crosses. It may also be seen in the case of the Fecal Padraic, which originally dates from the early 12th century. Indeed, when in position originally, the rock crystal on the Cross of Cong would have actually magnified the relic by around 300%, thus tricking the viewer into thinking that the relic was much larger than it really was. The front of the cross is covered with 5 cast copper alloy plates, 1 cruciform plate at the crossing, and 4 long plates, 1 on each arm, and 1 on the upper and lower sections of the shaft. The cruciform plate, which is made of brass, features a circular boss with a central crystal and was mainly decorated with gold filigree, while the 4 plates on the shaft and arms were gilded and are decorated with numerous panels of animal ornament. All of the plates are inlaid with silver and niello, a black-coloured inlay, and all were originally decorated with glass studs, although only 2 of these now survive, and they're the examples you can see on the screen. The central plate was originally held in place by 4 clamps, which are now missing, while the 4 longer plates were held in place by nails and possibly by rivets. X-rays of the cross reveal small square metal plaques located underneath the 4 plates, which probably relate to their attachment. The 4 large plates that cover the shaft and arms are largely decorated with numerous pairs of gilt panels of animal interlace, bordered by silver strips. Discs of niello, inlaid with silver wire, run along the centre of each plate, which originally alternated with glass studs, now missing. This layout, that is, circular panels or studs interrupted by straight-sided panels in a series, occurs on contemporary croziers, but may also be found on 8th century church metalwork, such as the Derry na Flan pattern. The 2 panels of each pair mirror each other in design and consist of intertwined animals of both thick and thin body width. The animals are predominantly fantastic creatures and are largely depicted in profile. By examining them in detail, I found that the designs, which consist of figures of 8s and loops, are formed out of only 3 different types of animals, which you can see here on the left. These correspond with the 3 animal types belonging to the Urnäs style, a late Viking art style in Scandinavia from which they derive. Indeed, the animal-based art style on the Cross of Cong can be classified as Hiberno-Urnäs or Irish Urnäs, as it exhibits several features of the Scandinavian style, as well as features more typical of Irish art. It may at first seem odd that Scandinavian artistic influence should be felt in Connacht, which is far removed from any of the Hiberno-Scandinavian towns such as Dublin, but this is something that I will return to later. The edging around the cross is made to look as if it consists of silver tubular binding strips. However, it is in fact made of solid cast copper alloy covered in silver sheet. This was presumably done to make the cross look traditional in its construction, as older Irish church metalwork, such as the Mayo bell shrine and the Tullylach cross, were constructed in that way. 18 projecting circular settings, inset with alternating pairs of dark green and red glass studs, punctuate the edging of the front of the cross. The glass studs, which I suppose replicate precious stones, were matched on the back of the cross by enamel discs. And these have a geometric pattern, and they're made in red and yellow enamel, quite striking. I can see a close-up of those here. Now, very similar enamel plaques, but on a much larger scale, occur on St Manchan's shrine from Monaghan in County Offaly, and we'll meet this reliquary again later. The back of the cross is less complex than the front and was originally covered with 4 gilt openwork plates, one of which is now missing. The surviving plates were individually cast and featured the same animal ornament that one finds on the front, consisting of intertwined type 1, 2, and 3 animals. Again, similar large openwork plates may be seen on the St Manchan shrine. The plates on the back of the cross were originally connected to each other at the crossing by a now missing central mount. Part of this missing mount is depicted in a watercolour by William Betham, which he carried out at Cong in or before 1829. This animal head formed part of the now missing mount and suggests that it was one of 4 similar animal heads cruciformly arranged. The sides of the cross are covered with copper alloy plates that carry the incised inscription, which are framed by herringbone borders. These plates are sheeted with silver, and nearly all of them were held in place with pins, the heads of which are formed out of tiny cast gilt animal heads, whose eyes are inset with glass. X-rays of the cross revealed the extent of these animal head pins on the cross for the first time. These tiny heads are really magnificent and may be compared with an animal-headed stick pin from the Rock of Cashel that was probably made by the same craftsman. The inscription is read from the front of the cross, beginning at the base on the left-hand side and continuing up and around the cross and down the other side. The layout of the inscription is remarkably similar to the layout of the inscription on an Anglo-Saxon reliquary of the True Cross, now preserved in Brussels, which dates from the early 11th century. At the base of the cross, there is a double animal head, a knop, and socket for the insertion of the carrying staff. These 3 components are hollow and were cast as one piece. The double animal head is a particularly beautiful piece of casting. It is gilded and the eyes are set with blue glass studs on one side and green on the other. Vegetal decoration on the sides of these may be a subtle allusion to the tree of life, the wood from which the true cross is said to have been made. The bulbous knop is similar to examples found on contemporary Irish croziers and is decorated in a similar manner to the plates on the front of the cross. Animal heads were an important decorative element not only on the Cross of Cong, but on early medieval Irish metalwork in general. While there are no direct comparisons for the double biting animal head on the base of the cross, there are a number of 8th or 9th century handles from Ireland that feature biting animal heads. However, biting animal heads were also common across Europe in the 11th and 12th centuries. Therefore, it's likely that the impetus for the biting animal heads at the base of the Cross of Cong come from the continent. Indeed, there is a strong similarity with a pair of door handles from the Church of St Germain-des-Prés in Paris. On the basis of both stylistic and technical analysis, there are a number of other important artifacts that may be attributed to the craftsman that made the Cross of Cong. These include St Manchan's shrine, an ivory crozier head from Ahadoe in County Kerry, a plaque from Holy Cross in County Tipperary, as well as an openwork plaque from a cross, an openwork mount from the gable of a small shrine, and the stick pin from Cashel. While not directly comparable with the Cross of Cong itself, 4 detached figures, which originally belonged to shrines, are so similar to those on St Manchan's shrine that they were most certainly produced by the same craftsman. As I mentioned in my introduction, The Irish Church was going through a major period of reform and reorganisation at this time, and major church synods, or assemblies, were held at Cashel in 1101, Rathbrazel in 1111, and Kells in 1152. This coincided with a flurry of activity in terms of scholarship, church building, as well as the enshrinement of relics. The output of the Cross of Cong workshop was part of this boom, and its commissions were influenced not only by the political ambitions of its main patron, Turlough O'Connor, but also by the circumstances created by the reformers. At the Synod of Rathbrazel, a system of geographically fixed dioceses was introduced into Ireland for the first time. 24 dioceses were established, 12 in the southern half of Ireland and a further 12 in the north, with Cashel and Armagh as the archdiocese over these, and Armagh holding the primacy. A system of diocesan organisation already existed in Ireland, and the reformers attempted to impose an artificial division of Ireland into 24 dioceses, following the English model. Such a rigid model could not be fully maintained in a country where dioceses had already developed, with the inevitable result of rivalry between churches that were jostling for position. Indeed, much of the scholarly, architectural, and artistic output at church sites in this period may have been inspired by this rivalry. While there were bishops of Connacht in the late 10th and 11th centuries, this bishopric does not seem to have been fixed to a particular place. Indeed, one of the complaints made to the Archbishop of Canterbury towards the end of the 11th century was that bishops in Ireland were either being assigned to places unsuitable to be episcopal seats, or were not being assigned to any fixed seat, diocese, or flock. While 5 sees were established in Connacht at the Synod of Rathbrazel, it did not have its own archdiocese. The diocesan centres were to be located at Tuam, Clonfert, Cong, Killala, and Ardcarn, and these were to be under the control of Armagh. Over 40 years later, at the Synod of Kells, Tuam and Dublin were also officially made archdiocesan capitals, and the original 24 dioceses created at Rathbrazel was increased to 38. The number of sees in Connacht increased to 7 and included Tuam, Roscommon, Clonfert, and Killala, and the 3 small dioceses of Kilmacduagh, Achonry, and Mayo. Indeed, the historian Aubrey Gwynn commented that the diocese of Connacht were changed more radically during the 40 years after Rathbrazel than anywhere else in 12th century Ireland. It seems most likely, however, that the process of diocesan restructuring was largely complete a number of years before Kells and was only ratified at that particular synod. Turlough O'Connor, you can see his name here in the inscription on the Cross of Cong itself, became King of Connacht in 1106 at the age of 18. The O'Connors were of the Sliabh Murray, whose lands were in modern-day County Roscommon. Turlough O'Connor was the most powerful king ever to emerge from Connacht. He proved to be a shrewd politician, a fierce military commander, and a generous patron of the church. He made frequent use of his fleets and cavalry on his military campaigns and built bridges and castles for his military advantage. By 1114, O'Connor had risen to prominence. He gained control of the kingdom of Midda or Meath in 1115, Breffni in 1117, Dublin in 1118, and the same year he split Munster in 2, dividing it between the rival McCarthy's and O'Brien's. Indeed, by 1121, O'Connor had become the most powerful king in Ireland. That same year, the Archbishop of Canterbury, by request, consecrated Grena as the Bishop of Dublin, and we are told that this request was supported by the King of Ireland. This was in defiance of Armagh and sought to undermine its authority. Indeed, while a bishopric has probably existed in Dublin since the early 11th century, it was not given this status at the Synod of Rathbrazil. O'Connor supported Dublin's claim for autonomy from Armagh because he was looking for ecclesiastical autonomy for Connacht at the same time. Indeed, as I will demonstrate, O'Connor quickly went about establishing an archdiocese for Connacht. His interest in Dublin and his control of the town from 1118 also helps to explain why Scandinavian artistic influence was reaching Connacht in the early 12th century, and why the Cross of Cong and other artifacts from the Roscommon workshop are decorated in the Hiberno-Urnese style. For 1123, the Chronicon Scotorum states that the Cross of Christ came into Connacht in this year. The annals of Tirnoch are more detailed about the event and record Christ's cross in Ireland in this year, and a great circuit was given to it by the King of Ireland, Turlough O'Connor, and he asked for some of it to keep in Ireland, and it was granted to him, and it was enshrined by him in Roscommon. The Cross of Cong bears an inscription on its side which details the names of the individuals involved in its creation, including Turlough O'Connor. The inscription also declares the function of the cross as a reliquary of the true cross. Therefore, there can be no mistake in equating the Cross of Cong with the references in the annals for 1123. The inscription on the cross has been transcribed and translated by Professor Pádraig Ó Riain as follows. By this cross is covered the cross on which the creator of the world suffered. And that's translated from the Latin and then translated from the Irish. A prayer for Murdoch O'Duffy, senior ecclesiast of Ireland. A prayer for Turlough O'Connor, King of Ireland, by whom was made this ornament. A prayer for Donal MacFlanagan O'Duffy from the borders of Connacht, successor of Cumann and Kieran, by whom was made this ornament. And a prayer for Mail Isu MacBrathon Iachuk, who made this ornament. And then finally, it reverts to Latin again. By this cross is covered the cross on which the creator of the world suffered. The order of the inscription appears to relate to the importance of the individuals mentioned. Thus, the inscription is headed by Murdoch O'Duffy, a member of an important ecclesiastical family in Connacht, who, like the O'Connors, were of the Sliabh Murdoch. Thus, one may assume that Murdoch O'Duffy was the principal person associated with the cross, which is in agreement with his ecclesiastical position as Senior of Ireland, a title he held until his death in 1150 at Cong. Notably, Murdoch was also to become the first Archbishop of the newly established Archbishopric of Connacht. As the patron and most powerful king in Ireland, Turlough O'Connor is mentioned next. This is followed by Donal MacFlanagan O'Duffy, the minor of the two O'Duffys, where he is recorded as the co-orb, or that is abbot, at both Roscommon and Clonmacnoise. His inclusion is not surprising, given that the reliquary was made at Roscommon, his own monastery. Finally, the craftsman, Melisu MacBrathon who is mentioned last, may have been a cleric and member of the community at Roscommon, but is not known otherwise. Just a few years later, in 1127, the Annals of Tirnoch record Turlough O'Connor, over-king of Ireland and the successor of St Jarlath, surround the common of Tuam from the southern end of Clad in Renda to Finmag. Then the king gave an offering of land from himself to the church in perpetuity from Mo to Kyle Clumain, that is, the southwestern half of the western part of Clun, to every good cleric of the Shlí Muradach who should dwell in Tuam, and the other half of it at the guest house of Tuam, into the hands of the prior. I have identified the land given by O'Connor as an area situated between Tuam and the River Clare, approximately 4 kilometres to the west. Here there was an important fording point at Clare Tuam that provided access to the west and south, and which was defended by a castle in the later medieval period. It's of particular note that half of these lands were to be reserved for clerics from the Shlí Muradach, O'Connor's own people. That is, of course, the O'Duffys. It seems likely that this was a move by O'Connor to give Muradach O'Duffy a power base at Tuam. Apart from the granting of lands, one's also told that O'Connor and the successor of St Jarlath, that's the abbot of Tuam, surrounded the common of Tuam. This appears to indicate that they erected some form of ecclesiastical enclosure. A section of what may be this enclosure can still be observed in a field between the cathedral and Vicar Street, while some of the modern street pattern may also reflect its former presence. High crosses were also used to mark the boundaries of ecclesiastical sites in Ireland and often occur in conjunction with enclosures. Thus, it is perhaps no coincidence that there are the remains of 4 12th-century high crosses surviving at Tuam, the most well-known and impressive being the Market Cross. In its present form, this sandstone cross consists of a base and shaft, as well as the head from a different cross. The original head apparently does not survive. The cross is massive and is predominantly decorated in the Hiberno-Urne style. Indeed, as Professor Roger Stalley has commented, the Market Cross was in effect an attempt to reproduce the Cross of Cong on a gigantic scale in stone. The surviving sections of a damaged inscription may be seen on the base of the cross. This inscription was transcribed and translated by George Petrie when it survived in somewhat better condition than today. His reading is as follows: a prayer for O'Heshin, for the abbot, by whom was made, it trails off, a prayer for Turlough O'Connor, we presume for the king, and Jarlath, another section there, by whom was made, section of inscription. So unfortunately, even at that time, it was quite damaged. The shaft of another high cross in the cathedral also bears an inscription which mentions Turlough O'Connor and Aid O'Heshin. Indeed, the inscriptions on both crosses are undeniable physical proof of O'Connor's patronage of Tuam in coordination with its abbot. Therefore, it seems most likely that the abbot who built the enclosure around Tuam with Turlough O'Connor in 1127 was Aid O'Heshin, and that the Market Cross and the cross shaft in the cathedral, which bear their names as commissioners, were erected at that time as part of the same scheme and served as ecclesiastical markers in conjunction with that boundary. There are also 2 other 12th century crossheads from Tuam, which may have been part of the same scheme. But what was O'Connor really doing at Tuam? He gives Murdoch O'Duffy a strategic piece of land, he erects a large enclosure around the site, and he has elaborately carved massive high crosses erected. What I believe he was doing is actually creating at Tuam an archdiocesan capital that was based on the layout of Armagh. But how does the Cross of Cong fit into all of this? Tuam seems to have possessed a number of relics in the early medieval period, principally those of its founding saint, St Jarlath. But unlike Armagh and Dublin, it seems to have lacked relics of universal importance. Armagh, as the most important church site in Ireland, had several relics that confirmed and maintained its status. The Bacchal Isu, or Staff of Jesus, was the principal relic of Armagh. It was not only a relic of Patrick, but as the name implies, it was a relic of Christ and is mentioned numerous times in the annals throughout the medieval period. Armagh also had the relics of Saints Peter and Paul, as well as those of Stephen and Lawrence, which were obtained in Rome. Christ Church Cathedral in Dublin, which was to officially achieve archiepiscopal status along with Tuam in 1152, possessed a relic of the True Cross and a relic of St. Peter's staff, along with several other important relics. These were kept together in a single casket, suggesting that the relics themselves were probably quite small, but nevertheless hugely significant. In terms of the status of both Armagh and Dublin, it seems to have been essential that they possessed relics of Christ. By bringing a relic of the True Cross from abroad on circuit in Ireland and retaining a portion of it in Connacht, it appears that O'Connor was seeking foreign support for Connacht's claim for an archdiocese. While the source of the relic is open to debate, there is a certain amount of evidence which suggests that it may have come from Norman England. And this is interesting given what we know of Canterbury's close connections with Dublin. Therefore, ultimately, the parent relic may have been brought to Europe from the First Crusade over 20 years earlier. Undoubtedly, the acquisition of a relic of the True Cross by Turlough O'Connor and its enshrinement in a processional cross played a significant role in achieving an archdiocese for Connacht. Securing such a holy relic would have dramatically increased the religious status of the province. The Cross of Cong's close association with Murdoch O'Duffy is also telling. Sometime during the first decade of the 12th century, Bishop Samuel of Dublin was rebuked by the Archbishop of Canterbury for having a cross carried before him in procession, a practice proper only to an archbishop, confirmed by the Roman pontiff with the pall. The enshrinement of a relic of the True Cross in a processional cross associated with a person who was later confirmed as the Archbishop of Connacht was a major statement. The Cross of Cong was in effect Connacht's equivalent to the Bacchal Isu of Armagh. To conclude, the Cross of Cong is a skillfully made, intricately decorated, powerful piece of Irish 12th century craftsmanship that was created for the glory of God 900 years ago. It was produced at a time when the church in Ireland was highly politicized and when secular and church politics were often indistinguishable. It was commissioned by a highly ambitious king who not only achieved his supremacy through his extensive military campaigns, but also through his patronage of the church. With the support of Turlough O'Connor, the Cross of Cong workshop became one of the greatest workshops of early medieval Ireland. It was, however, the last great workshop in Ireland to produce metalwork in the early medieval Irish tradition. Indeed, the Cross of Cong survives as the last great masterpiece of that tradition, and it speaks to us today of a confident, receptive, and changing society.
Thank you, Griffin, for that brilliant lecture. There are so many stories and different avenues of research that you have done and others have done on the Cross of Cong. It's a really complex object. So I want to thank you, but I think what we'll do is we'll start maybe looking at one or two of the questions that came in. And certainly, I mean, you mentioned there, the name of the maker, Mayo is on the cross, which is, I always thought that was one of the most amazing things about it. We actually had the name of somebody who made it, because that is such a rare thing. And I think it's caught people's imagination as well, who are just putting in questions there into us and asking us a little bit more. Is there any more information we can be precise about the amount of people who might have made it, or its exact location of creation? And I know they're difficult questions to answer.
Well, they're not in one sense.
Oh,
I mean,
good.
yeah, like just listening back to the lecture now, there's a lot in that lecture, so it's perhaps a bit too much. But I was trying to put it in context.
Yeah, no, it's
the beauty of the Cross of Cong, and it's fantastic that we can celebrate its 900th anniversary now. But this is the beauty of it. It is one of the few pieces that we have that we actually know so much about it. So when it was made, more or less precisely when it was made, where it was made, and who was involved in its creation, including, both the patronage and the actual name of the craftsman himself. We don't have that for any of our other treasures. So if we think of things like the Tara brooch, the Arda chalice, the Derry Flan paten, we know absolutely nothing about them, really. A lot of it is guesswork. We don't know all of those things. We don't have the precise dating. We don't know who created them. We don't know who the patrons were. We can guess, but it is only guesswork. We have all this historical information associated with the Cross of Cong, both from the lengthy inscription that's on the cross itself that I explained, but also those annalistic references. And the period itself, like the Irish annals, are very rich in this period. So they give us a really good idea of what was happening at the time in Ireland and the activities of Turlough O'Connor, for instance. So with regard to, I get this question a bit about Roscommon, where in Roscommon was it made? And this is a thing that comes up, quite a bit. So we think, we're obviously familiar with our counties now, and County Roscommon, I'm from County Cork, whatever, County Dublin. They're a 17th century creation. They did not exist in the medieval period, okay? They're a creation of English administration in Ireland, administrative divisions of Ireland. They're very late. They're quite late. So when we talk about Roscommon in the medieval period, we are talking about the monastery of Roscommon, and its location is now where Roscommon town is today. So that's it with regards to the place. And then there was a question in relation to how many people were involved. Given we have the name of this individual, it seems that there was principally one person involved in its creation, Mayo, but that's not to say that he didn't have help. I mean, this is speculation, but I suppose it's informed speculation in that we know, that medieval craftsmen and craftsmanship, there was an apprentice system in place then in the medieval period, as there is in the more modern period. Often this is hereditary, and that clearly craftsmen would have had apprentices helping them at this time. So I can't answer that question definitively, but it seems unlikely that the person was working on their own and didn't have help from other quarters in terms of kind of preparing materials and things like that. It's interesting as well, and this is the other one that people kind of seem not to grasp because of, I suppose, a downplaying really of metal craftsmanship in more modern times in art historical senses. But we have to understand that craftsmen in this period, to have your name on an inscription like that indicates that this person is of very high status and was regarded very highly by their society. So that's just another thing.
And certainly, I mean, you showed us amazing detailed images of the artwork on the Cross of Cong. And I mean, it was also great to see the work you've done with the conservator here in the museum, Dr. Paul Malarkey, as well. And even with Elaine identifying the wood itself as oak. But I think a lot of people are asking specifically about that Hiberno-Norse design that we see reflected on the Cross of Cong, and that you were saying is, you know, coming from that connection with Dublin. And I suppose, I don't know if you can see those questions, if there's anything you can add that you think in the time that we have. Is there anything more that you want to say about that?
Yeah, well, I suppose what I was trying to kind of get, maybe I didn't put it across as well as I hoped, but what I was trying to communicate, I suppose, really was that, you know, the Cross of Cong it's an incredibly Irish object, but at the same time, it's actually an incredibly European object, like, you know, and that isn't overstating it at all. So what I was trying to draw out there was like some of the influences. There seems to be influences from England at the time. There seems to be influences from continental Europe, and there are these quite strong overt influences from Scandinavia. And that has to be mediated through Dublin. And it also kind of tells us, like, you know, it tells us that Dublin, even though Dublin is established a long, long time at this stage, that the connections between Dublin and other towns in Ireland, such as Cork, Limerick, Waterford, that connections with Scandinavia are still quite strong in that period. We're really at the end of the Viking period here. We're more or less out of it, to be honest. It's still referred to as kind of Viking art because it all hangs together. It's all animal art. But you know, it's still, those connections are still quite strong there. And it's really interesting that it's actually only really in the 11th and 12th century that we see the influence of Viking art in Ireland, of Scandinavian art in Ireland in a really strong way. Whereas back in the kind of earlier period, in the actual more classic Viking period, we're not seeing that. And I think there's various reasons for that, including more maybe integration, cultural integration, but also, of course, the fact that the settled Vikings who are now settled for generations and generations here, you know, become Christianized, start creating objects like this themselves in Dublin, and then are copied elsewhere also. So there's an awful lot going on, and it's really to show that, you know, Ireland is really connected into the rest of Europe in this time. And of course, one of the really strange things that I can't figure out, because we don't know, is where did the relic actually come from? So it comes into Ireland. Turlough O'Connor brings it on a tour around the country, but where did he get it from? I suspect it came from England. That's my suspicion.
Yeah, because I think somebody had asked about that, and you know, about the visit of the you know, the shrine of the piece of the true cross itself, and I think that's a very, you know, as you say, it's a difficult one to answer. Just about the sandstone, and that's an interesting question. I suppose sandstone is vulnerable to weathering. I mean, the high crosses themselves, is it unusual to have sandstone used?
No, it's not, because of course sandstone is much easier to carve than limestone. So it lends itself well to sculpture, but of course, yes, it does weather, and that's one of the reasons why the market cross at Tuam was moved indoors. Also, it was in the middle of the square, and you know, it was the same in Kells when they moved the market cross at Kells, because you know, there's a danger from traffic and lorries and things like that as well. Like, you know,
the modern world is hard on sandstone, definitely. I think it's great as well, you know, to see the role of the Royal Irish Academy there in protecting the cross and taking it into its collection and displaying it. And of course, the connection with William Wilde is a really interesting one as well, just to see that famous antiquarian also noted, you know, the importance of this fantastic object. I think, is there anything else that you sort of feel that you'd like to mention?
Well, just to go into that kind of transition. I mean, I think it's quite kind of heartbreaking, that tradition that we're here in just kind of pre-famine Ireland. Population is quite poor, quite downtrodden, and they're kind of, you know, trying to hang on to these things within the community. And of course, a lot of these reliquaries continued to be used right up to the early 19th century. Used in the communities. Not as museum pieces, but actually as functional objects. And we got insights into that, but clearly, even with Wilde's recollections of what was happening, clearly there was a point in time where the cross was being damaged, it was being interfered with. He said about the crystal being carried by a lady in her pocket, as if, again, in a kind of a charm sense or some reliquary sense, but there was damage happening. We know bits were missing. In fact, actually, when it was recorded in the early 19th century, it seems to have been actually more or less perfect.
Okay.
And the damage and the loss that we see there seems to have actually just occurred in the early 19th century.
Okay.
So, well, it's heartbreaking to read that letter and to read about the local population.
And that they're so poor and they want to retain it. Yes.
Absolutely, But the means weren't there, I suppose, to retain it, and the interest wasn't there by the church at the time either. So it is a blessing in a way. It's a bit of a contradiction, but it's a blessing in a way that it did come in to the Royal Irish Academy and became for them a really important acquisition and kind of built momentum about actually building a national collection of archaeology at the time. And it's the origin of the National Museum of Ireland in Kildare Street and its collections.
Yeah, and I suppose just to say, I mean, so many of the objects, that such as the Cross of Cong are still on display. They're free of charge to come in and see. They're owned by the state for the people of Ireland to come in and research and look at and learn more about. And, it is, as you say, it's the Tower Brooch, the Ardagh Chalice, the Tullylach Cross, the Derry na Flan Patten, the Lismore Crozier. They're all here and they're all, on display in the museum, and anybody can come in and see them, which is a wonderful asset for Ireland as a nation to have today, I think,
Absolutely. And they're all together as well in the Treasury exhibition, mostly. So actually, you can look at you can go into the gallery for yourselves. You can look at these different objects and you can see the connections and the differences between them yourselves. So it's amazing, and I'd recommend anyone who hasn't been in to the Treasury exhibition to make that a kind of a priority.
Well, thank you, Griffin. We like to think it's a good thing to come and see as well. And it, on the museum website, there's the opening hours, and it is free of charge to come in and enjoy the museum. Well, listen, Griffin, I think it's just 2:00, so I'm afraid we're going to have to call a halt to today's conversation and that wonderful lecture. And I'd just like to thank you again. And I'd also like to thank everybody who posed questions and who came in and watched us online today. I mean, I know we had around 200 people had booked in with us. So we'd like to thank you for coming along and listening as well today. So thank you, Griffin. And I hope everybody has a good afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. And thanks everyone for coming.